Hello, my name is Paul Jones, author of Concerning a Nation and several videos on Bible prophecy. The last king or prince mentioned in Daniel 11 arrives in verse 21 and goes all the way through to the end of the chapter and to the end of time. There is no evidence nor any justification for pretending that any verse after 21 refers to more than one person. It is a continuity. So, who is he? Numerous candidates have been put forward by very educated men. However, some people believe that the prince who emerges in verse 21 is Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and this may be logical to secular historians. After all, chapter 11 contains a history of the wars between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. But secular historians don't believe Daniel is a book of miraculous prophecy. Daniel 11:20 refers to the usurper Heliodorus, who murdered Seleucus IV in order to take the throne. Well, so far so good. And Heliodorus was himself replaced by Antiochus IV. So it follows therefore that the next character in chapter 11 must be Antiochus IV, correct? But for Christian readers this cannot be the case for many reasons. Firstly, as stated, the character in verse 21 is not replaced by anyone. But there's another, even more compelling reason, and it's breathtaking how many Christians fail to understand this. I recently saw a lecture in which the speaker, presumably a Christian, tried to fit the life of Antiochus IV into verses 21 to 35 of chapter 11. When talking about the abomination of desolation in verse 31, he actually referred to the Olivet Discourse, as if what Jesus said confirmed his view. This is a future prophecy. How can a future prediction possibly be proof that someone else did it nearly 200 years previously? Not only that, but this event signals the worst tribulation in human history, which means that it must be worse than that seamless garment of massacres which we call the 20th century. Now, I'm not denying here that Antiochus was a blasphemous megalomaniac who persecuted the Jews, so he is a speciously logical choice. But Bible prophecy has to fit events exactly. If the Olivet Discourse spoken in the 1st century is future prophecy, then verses 29 to 31 in chapter 11 of Daniel are also future prophecy. And seeing that the same character is referred to in verse 28, we can see the problem. Namely that this neat prophecy of foreign occupation up until the period of Hasmonean self-rule is bafflingly incomplete. Let's go back to the start. In verse 21 we're told that this new king will not be given royal majesty or will not be given the honour of the kingdom. It's a difficult phrase, but it certainly does not refer to any legitimate ruler. In some way or another he comes from outside. Was that Antiochus IV? No. Antiochus was of the royal family of the Seleucids and himself overthrew a usurper Heliodorus who wasn't. Antiochus restored the throne to the Seleucid dynasty. His nephew Demetrius, the alleged heir, was a hostage in Rome. Antiochus is a lot less of an outsider than we've been led to believe. We are then told that the king will sweep away armies before him and the Prince of the Covenant also. So, who is this Prince of the Covenant mentioned in verse 22? We don't know yet. But it cannot, as some people have suggested, be any Jewish priest living at the time, since the separation of secular and religious titles was very strict in Jewish law. A prince is a prince and a priest is a priest. This covenant is almost certainly referring to a political alliance or treaty, not the Holy Covenant which is mentioned later. And this takes us to the next point. Some people cannot explain these initial wars with reference to the life of Antiochus IV, and we're told few details. In order to explain this, we are told that this is just a general theme of his life, but the specific reference to the Prince of the Covenant suggests otherwise. One of the most important rules of Bible prophecy is that we assume that things are chronological unless we have a good reason not to. Otherwise we have a license to jump about everywhere and rewrite prophecy, like children forcing the wrong pieces of a jigsaw puzzle to fit. In any case, is this the theme of Antiochus' life? Was he some great all-conquering warrior who swept aside armies? No. He was a competent leader, but no Napoleon or Alexander. He had two indisputable victories that I know of. Have a look at the lives of all the great military dictators. With the exception of Alexander the Great, who was the legitimate heir to the throne of Macedonia, they don't just become leaders without some actions which establish themselves as serious contenders. Napoleon, for example, didn't just walk in and make himself emperor. He had to win great victories in Italy against the Austrians to gain a following and a power base. Hitler spent years building up a gigantic movement from nothing. Wars were fought on the street. These dictators, outsiders both, didn't just appear from nowhere and have a ready-made audience. Before the prince can make an alliance with anyone, he has to have military and political credibility. As they say in international politics, there is no diplomacy without sanctions, that is, without the threat of force. There will be numerous campaigns and mighty victories. Now, what about that other famous phrase in verse 30, the one which refers to those ships of Kittim? Kittim, of course, means Cyprus, the land of copper. Sometimes, apparently, it also means the Western Isles, whatever they are, or the western coastlands. And sometimes, as in the case of the Septuagint, it means Rome. And at some times, if it suits the interpreters, I'm pretty sure that it will come to mean the United Nations, the European Union, the Chase Manhattan Bank, or possibly West Bromwich Albion Football Club. Rome was the ascendant power when the Septuagint version of Daniel was written, so they decided it was a reference to Rome, just as people today try to force the United States or the European Union into Bible prophecy. People who want the Bible to mean what they want it to mean try to have it both ways here. Kittim means Rome when it suits them, but they also get very excited by the fact that Antiochus IV actually tried to conquer Cyprus itself. But, as I've stated, the Bible must fit events exactly. This verse specifically describes a naval discomfiture which forces the prince back. Ships of Kittim will come against him. This did not happen. In fact, according to George Hill in his History of the Island, the naval invasion of Cyprus was very well planned and executed, a total success for the fleets of Antiochus. By the way, Cyprus did not belong to Rome at the time and would not for about 100 years. It belonged to the Ptolemies. Antiochus eventually withdrew from Cyprus for wider strategic reasons, in which the power of Rome was a major factor, but not because a fleet of ships from Cyprus or anywhere else forced him out or forced him back. The Bible verse is highly specific and unambiguous. Why does this attempt to fit Antiochus IV stop at verse 35? In order to make Antiochus fit the prophecy, he has to apparently die in verse 35, while the Jews themselves are organising their uprising. Antiochus actually did die in 164 BC, just after the revolt of the Maccabees, but the king's death is not mentioned in verse 35. So what happens next? Verse 36 says, "And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god." This man isn't dying, he's just reaching the apogee of his power. In most Bible versions, verse 36 begins with "and," suggesting continuity. It doesn't say "and then a new king comes along." In the previous verses, we always know when we're talking about a new character. Now all this leaves the Antiochus lobby with three paths. One is to say that verses 21 to 28 refer to Antiochus IV, and then the rest refer to someone else in the future. This cannot be, since we are not told that verse 29 is referring to someone else. Indeed, the sense is definitely the opposite. This would also be an admission that those crucial and famous verses about Kittim and the abomination are not about Antiochus, which severely undermines the force of the argument that Antiochus IV must be included in order to complete the history of the occupation of Judah and take the chapter up to the point of Hasmonean self-rule. And why put half of his life in? The second is to say that verses 21 to 28 refer to Antiochus IV, and then he returns in the end time. To the best of my knowledge, no one is saying this, nor do I have a problem with historical characters returning in the future. But again, you have the admission that the events of verses 29 to 31 are not historical. So this is an admission again that the history of the occupation of Judah by foreign oppressors is not complete. Nor, incidentally, was Antiochus the last Seleucid to make the Hall of Jewish Infamy. That was his nephew, Demetrius Soter, who defeated the Maccabees and killed Judas Maccabeus. If Antiochus is not the great desecrator of Daniel, then what importance does he have? The worst desecrators of the temple in history so far have been the Jews themselves. Also, Nebuchadnezzar, Titus and Pompey committed sacrilege in the temple. None of them set off the Great Tribulation, which is yet to happen. The third path is that this is all future prophecy involving Antiochus IV, in which case it could be anyone in the future, since we don't have to match it to any historical events, and we must look for other information to identify the prince. But you'll have to read my book for that. Thank you for watching and God bless you. My name is Paul Jones. Please be sure to read Concerning a Nation, published by Lulu. Thank you again and God bless you.